During the winter of 1981, the Memphis Police Department received 11 reports of a bear crossing roads on the south end of President's Island. President's Island is an industrial complex in Memphis, located just south of downtown on the Mississippi River. It's an area packed with manufacturing facilities, warehouses, and surrounded by wild, mostly untouched forest within a 3-mile radius. Despite the industrial surroundings, this area holds an abundance of wildlife. However, there hadn't been bears in this part of the delta for over 100 years. Drivers reported seeing a dark-colored animal at night, never during daylight hours. This creature didn't seem afraid of traffic and would dart off the highway and into the woods once vehicles got close. Reports continued until suddenly, they stopped. The bear had seemingly disappeared. The authorities investigated, but no bear, tracks, or scat were ever found. The reports were dismissed as fakes, similar to the hundreds of reports about black panthers in the woods. Then, on a cold March night, something unusual happened. Joshua, a trucker on a run, was heading to President's Island. He had been driving for hours and was ready for some sleep, crossing the bridge into the island. He noticed the fog had rolled in. He should have slowed down, but he was eager to reach the yard. As he approached Harbor and Channel Avenue, the fog thickened. Joshua reduced his speed to 45 miles per hour, trying to see through the fog. Suddenly, something dark appeared on the road. He hit it with his right bumper, feeling the impact. He wasn't sure what it was. Perhaps an animal, but who would be standing in the middle of the highway on the island at this hour? It had to be an animal, but Joshua had to see it. If he had hit a person, he would never forgive himself. So he pulled over. The highway was desolate, not a vehicle in sight. Streetlights cast an eerie orange glow. Walking back toward the end of his trailer, he inspected the area, expecting to find a dead animal. But there was nothing. Turning on his flashlight, he scanned the area, estimating he had traveled about 50 to 100 yards past the animal. He continued further down the highway, shining his light on the west bank of the levee below him. After a few steps, he spotted something just a few feet down the levee bank, a dark figure lying motionless in the wet grass. He approached cautiously, assuming he had hit a large dog. But it was way too big to be a dog. As he got closer, the figure moved, stretching and rolling over. It was no dog or bear. It was a human in some kind of gorilla suit, perhaps someone playing a prank. But when its eyes opened in the beam of his light, he knew this thing had to be a person. He stepped back as the figure started to make noises and groan. He moved closer for a better look, when suddenly the figure grabbed his leg, jerking him to the ground. With a hand on his chest, it lifted itself to a standing position and ran further down the levee. Joshua watched as it fell and rolled several times, finally coming to a stop at the bottom of a steep hill. Joshua wished it had gone into the woods. Then he could call the police and explain what happened. It was the truth, but now he had to check on this guy again before calling the police. As he walked down to the figure, he noticed something was different. It wasn't breathing. He nudged it with his boot, but there was no response. He leaned down to check for a heartbeat, realizing this was not a human. It had hair and skin like no costume. It resembled an ape or something similar. Just as he determined it was dead, the creature gave one last loud moan, a death moan that hurt his ears. Then it lay still. Joshua decided to go back to his truck and find help. As he turned to walk up the hill, a noise from the woods caught his attention. It was getting louder and closer. Panic set in as he heard it approaching, and all he could think was, run. He started to climb up the hill when something grabbed him from behind, lifting him off the ground. Whatever had him had its nails dug into his shoulder, causing excruciating pain as he felt bones breaking in his shoulder and upper arm. He hung there, several feet off the ground, gritting his teeth against the agony. Just as he was about to scream, the thing turned him around, revealing itself. It was the same as the creature he had hit, but several times larger. The beast took its eyes off Joshua momentarily, looking at the dead creature on the ground. Then it turned back to Joshua, emitting a bone-chilling scream that filled him with terror. Snot-like fluids covered its face, and the odor from its mouth was unbearable, causing Joshua to vomit. The beast stared straight into his eyes, tilting its head as if to convey the message, "You are done for." But it dropped Joshua to the ground and then walked over to the dead creature, touching it tenderly, almost like a mother comforting a child. A long, grief-filled moan escaped from the creature as it picked up the lifeless body and disappeared into the woods. Joshua lay there in agony and terror, wondering what would happen next. However, nothing did. Eventually, he managed to pull himself up and began the painful ascent up the steep bank. He reached his truck, but before he could climb in, another truck's lights appeared in the distance. He moved to the middle of the highway, flagging it down. The driver helped Joshua into the passenger side, and they headed for the nearest hospital. Along the way, the driver inquired about what had happened, and Joshua, overwhelmed and in pain, simply said he was attacked by a bear, remembering the rumors of bear sightings in the area. Joshua underwent surgery the next day and spent a week in the hospital. Police and wildlife officials visited him, asking numerous questions about the bear attack and his presence on the highway. Joshua claimed he couldn't remember much, insisting he had pulled over to check a flat tire when the attack occurred. On his last day in the hospital, a tall man in a suit entered his room. The man sat by his bed, looked at Joshua through his sunglasses, and began a cryptic conversation. He emphasized that they both knew it wasn't a bear that attacked Joshua, and hinted at the severity of the situation. The man warned Joshua against confiding in anyone about the true nature of the attack, citing potential risks to his safety and his family's safety. Joshua nodded in agreement, understanding the gravity of the situation. The man leaned closer and said, "I need to hear you say it, Joshua." Joshua hesitated, and the room fell into silence. Then Joshua finally spoke up, saying, "I'm the guy who was attacked by a bear on President's Island." The man in sunglasses didn't press further, respecting the decision. Now, let's transition to the story of the encounter in Glacier National Park. This is the first time I've shared this story since the incident in 2014. My girlfriend Cindy and I were visiting Glacier National Park. Cindy had undergone spinal surgery just over a year ago, and although she was healed, we stuck to easier trails to avoid any strain on her back. One such trail was the Trail of the Cedars, which featured a boardwalk and minimal elevation gain. The day was beautiful, sunny, but not too hot, and even cooler on the shaded trail surrounded by ancient cedars and other trees. Many of these cedars were several hundred years old, and the forest floor was covered with ferns and moss. The entire setting felt like a glimpse into a prehistoric world. We weren't sure how far we had gone, maybe a little over half a mile, when the boardwalk took a slight bend between large trees, temporarily obstructing our view ahead. As we rounded the bend and looked down the boardwalk, we were surprised to see movement just off the side of the trail. It was a large, dark reddish figure, hunched over as if searching for something in the ferns and underbrush. At first, we didn't feel alarmed or suspicious because we weren't expecting to encounter anything unusual. It crossed our minds that it might be a Park Service employee or another hiker in dark clothing, looking for something they had dropped off the trail. However, as we continued toward it, I realized that whatever it was too massive and bulky to be a regular person. I stopped immediately and grabbed Cindy's arm, who had taken another half step forward without seeing it. I pointed it out to her, and at that moment, the figure stood up and turned its gaze directly toward us. We were approximately 50 to 75 feet away, but it was challenging to judge the exact distance due to the winding nature of the boardwalk through the trees. As it stood up, an eerie sensation washed over me, and I felt the hair on the front of my hairline stand up almost like a wave. A hot, sickening feeling came over me. I was with Cindy, who had recently undergone spinal surgery and wouldn't be able to run far or fast. I had come unarmed, and the thought of what might happen next worried me. As it rose, I realized that I was looking at a genuine Sasquatch. The massive cedars around it made it difficult to gauge its height and width precisely, but I would estimate it was at least 8 feet tall, if not over 8.5 feet. It didn't exactly match Patty from the Patterson film. Patty had a distinct rounded buttock and thigh area, while this Sasquatch appeared muscular in a different way. Its side profile lacked the pronounced curve of Patty's backside muscles. My eyes couldn't make sense of it. This Sasquatch had a domed skull and a head that sat low on the chest with no visible neck. However, its fur was more reddish, brown, blending with the forest floor. The fur seemed to hug the body, not hanging off. Its face was furry, with a pointed brow, wide nose, and a blocky look to the head. The encounter lasted about 1.5 seconds. The Sasquatch stood up, looked at us, and casually walked away through the cedars. It felt surreal yet natural. I feared aggression, but found none. We didn't complete the trail that day, returning to our car. We later reported the sighting to a park official who took notes, but he remained non-committal. In 2008, my boyfriend and I shared a single, unreliable car, a 1994 Honda Accord. I frequently prayed it wouldn't break down. That night, while driving on I-40 from Old Forge to Black Mountain after my third shift job, the car gave out. I stopped by the road near an emergency truck ramp and called my boyfriend. He answered, said he would find someone to help me and take care of my car. I was surrounded by darkness as I waited, with only the occasional passing car as a light. Time passed slowly, and I started to feel really uneasy. The dense trees to my left made everything feel more spooky. Then I smelled something awful, like something rotting in the night, which made me shiver. I quickly locked the car doors and held onto a small pepper spray on my keyring, as if it could protect me from unseen dangers. Suddenly, a loud thump shook the car, and I was scared stiff. I tried to turn on the headlights, and their weak light shone into darkness. I saw a horrifying face at the edge of the light. It had big dark eyes, a very wide nose, and was covered in tangled fur. I was frozen in fear as I looked into its deep, dark eyes. The lights of a car coming from behind distracted it, and it disappeared into the shadows. I kept screaming, terrified, looking everywhere for the creature. My shaky hands tried to use my old, unreliable phone to call for help, and I wished I had a flashlight. As time went on, I kept honking the car horn, hoping someone would come to help. The awful smell stuck to me, filling me with fear. The scary thing seemed to be nearby, not bothered by my panic. Only when a police officer showed up, alerted by my calls for help, did I feel a bit safer. I told the officer there was a stranger around, but I didn't mention how scary it really was. The officer noticed the bad smell and then left, but I still felt scared. I was relieved when my boyfriend finally came, and we drove away, deciding to never go back to that part of the road. Thank you for listening to more stories from True Chills. See you again next time and have a great day.